I am so glad that you all are joining me tonight virtually. This is a new way to do ghost stories, but I like it. I think it's fun. I've got everything all set up here, but I have a few things to tell you before we start. So first of all, the way my stories work is they are folk tales that I'm sharing with you, which means somebody told somebody else, who told somebody else, who told somebody else, who told somebody else, who told somebody else, and someone told me. So it might be when I tell these stories, you say, oh, wait, I know that one, except when I heard it, it was a little bit different. And that's cool. That's because every storyteller kind of makes it their own. So the important part is if you have heard the story before, don't give away the ending. That's often the best part of ghost stories. So you have to just keep it inside, even if you know what's coming, just keep it inside so you don't ruin it for your family that's with you. The other thing that might happen, you all look very, very brave to me, but maybe, just maybe, you'll start to get some kind of scared feelings. I find it really helps to squeeze the hand of someone you love. So if you are sitting with some family members, even if it's your brother or sister, and you're like, well, I don't love them all the time, it'll still work. It really gives you comfort if you just give them a gentle little squeeze. And at the end, we'll do something else to help get any scary feelings out of us. But remember, these are just stories. And if you are ready, let me think of a fun ghost signal you can give me. Can you go like this and look really scary, and then I'll know you're ready? Oh, I see some scary faces. Awesome. All right. I'm going to start with my very favorite ghost story. It's an African-American ghost story from the south of the United States, and it's called Tailypo. Now, usually I ask people to talk along with me, but again, we're going to ask everybody to put their microphones on mute just because it's a little easier to manage in a large group like this. And I'll do most of the work, and you really just have to listen and have a good time. Does that sound like a good deal?
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Here we go.
Switch to gallery view.
So this story takes place on a cold October night, kind of like tonight, where there was a lot of dampness in the air and the wind was blowing all of the leaves all about. And the story takes place deep, deep, deep in the woods down in Virginia. There was this little log cabin, and it was a very, very simple little house. It just had one chair, one table, one bed to sleep in, and there wasn't even a stove. The mean old man who lived there had to cook in a big pot in his fireplace. Now, I mentioned that he's mean. He was so mean, he had not managed to make one single friend his whole life long. Well, unless you count his dogs. He did have 3 dogs who were just as mean as he was. Their names were Eno, Uno, and Calico. So this mean old man and his 3 mean dogs lived in this little cabin in the woods. And as I said, on this cold October night, he was stirring up some dinner in his pot over the fire. And he really just had beans in that pot. He was wishing he had caught a fish or a possum or something, but all he had were beans. While he was stirring up his beans, his eyes were wandering around the dark cabin, and he happened to notice something. There was a hole in his floor, and well, he had meant to fix that hole about 100 times before, but now when he looked, there was a hand coming up through the hole in the floor, and it was not a normal hand like my hand or like your hands. It was covered with a red mangy fur, and it had long yellow nails, and while he watched, suddenly there were 2 hands coming up through the hole in the floor. And then the creature squeezed its whole ugly body up through that hole in the floor. And it was like nothing the man had ever seen before. And yet parts of it were familiar. It had glowing yellow eyes like an owl, and its whole body was covered with that red mangy fur, and and its nails were horrible looking, and well, the strangest thing about it though really was its tail. Its tail was long, and its tail was slimy and scaly, and it wrapped around and around that creature's body. Well, I told you this old man was mean, so it took a lot to scare him. He just sat there staring at the creature, and the creature just stared back at him. And they sat like that for a while. But all the while, the man was slowly, quietly reaching beside his chair for his axe, and he brought it down with a chop. But that creature was pretty fast. It managed to squeeze back down through that hole in the floor, and he could hear it running out into the woods. Then he looked. The creature wasn't quite fast enough, because when his axe came down, he had managed to chop off the creature's tail, and now the creature was long gone, but the tail, it was still kind of squirming and wiggling around on the floor. You're not going to believe what he did next. Well, maybe you will. He said, "Meat's meat." And he picked up the tail and he threw that slimy tail in the pot with all his beans. He was going to eat it. He kept stirring it and cooking it up. And you know, the thing is, that slimy tail actually, it smelled pretty good. So he decided to take a taste of the slimy tail stew, and it was delicious. Oh, he loved it. He shoveled it in. He ate every single spoonful in that pot until his belly was so full. You know how after you have a really big meal and all you want to do is just sit in your chair and he fell asleep. Well, he slept like that for a while, right? And then he heard a kind of scratching noise outside the house. And then he said, no, 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 I'm not going to get scared. That's probably just the wind blowing some dry branches across the side of the house, right? But then he definitely heard a voice. And the voice said, "Taily po, taily po, I want my taily po." Well, he couldn't exactly give it back, could he? It was in his tummy. He remembered the three dogs. He said, "Eno, Uno, Calico, get rid of that monster." And he heard the dogs. They took off barking, running, chasing that creature far out into the woods. And he listened. And he heard his dogs come back and settle in under the porch. And then he thought, you know what, this is silly to be sleeping in this chair. I need to get a proper rest in my bed. So he went over to his bed and he fluffed up his pillow and he laid his head on the bed and he heard it again. You can try the words with me if you want. Taily po, taily po. Then use an angry voice. I want my taily po. He tried again. Eno, Uno, Calico, I told you, get rid of that monster. And again, he heard the dogs barking and chasing the creature, but then it got quiet. He didn't hear his dogs come back. So now he felt very much alone in his little dark cabin. He decided maybe he wouldn't get a very good night's sleep after all, so he sat in his chair in front of that fireplace and he took his axe and he placed it on his lap and he sat there and he waited. And he waited. And while he waited, the fire in the fireplace got smaller and smaller, and the room got colder and colder and darker and darker. And soon it was so dark you could hold your hand in front of your face like this and you wouldn't even be able to see it. And that's why when he heard the voice again, he could tell from the sound of it, it was inside the cabin with him. But he couldn't see a thing. He just heard that voice again saying, Taily Po, Taily Po. Pound your fist and get angry. I want my Taily Po. He was going to yell back at the creature. And then he realized, wait a minute, if I can't see the creature, maybe it can't see me either. So he decided instead he would just sit very, very still and be very, very quiet. He tried to not even breathe too loudly. And he sat like that for hours. Finally, a little bit of sunlight started to come through the window, and he thought, "Ooh, what a weird night. I think I let my imagination get away from me. I think I need some sleep." So again, he went over to his bed and he fluffed up his pillow and he laid down his head. Uh-oh. He heard it again. And guys, I hate to tell you, but it was under his bed. Oh, it said, Taily Po, Taily Po, I want my Taily Po. And the man shouted back at it this time. He said, I don't have your old Taily Po. Yes, you do. You ate my Taily Po. And then that creature leapt on the bed, whoo, scratched that mean old man all to pieces. Well, I gotta tell you, folks never heard from that mean old man again. But remember, he had never done anything nice for a single human being, so nobody really much missed him. And the three mean dogs, same story. But I have heard that if you're ever traveling through Virginia and you find yourself in this same little dark part of the woods, the log cabin has long since fallen down, but the chimney is still standing. And they say that if you're lucky and you listen very closely, you just might hear a little voice say, Taily Po, Taily Po, I got my Taily Po. And he did. Woo, that's the first one. How are you feeling? You can give yourself a little wiggle if you need to have a little wiggle after the first one. I hope you're enjoying it. Colin, you can interrupt me if need be, if something crazy is happening with Zoom, but otherwise, we're going to go on to story number 2. Give me a thumbs up if you're ready. Excellent. Now, this next story has so many different versions. It's crazy. I have heard it set in all different kinds of settings, but I happen to like this version, which is from the Appalachian Mountains, which are right here in Pennsylvania. So this story is kind of old-fashioned. Like now we know that girls can do anything, right? But it's kind of old-fashioned. So it's set in an old-fashioned farming town. And what would happen every day is the boys and the men would go out to the field to do the work. And there were girls who would bring lunch out to them. And when they were done eating lunch, then they would bring the dirty forks and spoons and whatnot home and clean up and wait for their dads and their brothers to get home from the fields after work. So there were 2 girls that had this job every day. And they were very, very different. One girl was very sweet. She was always thinking of other people, always trying to be kind to someone, and always just making people laugh. You probably have a friend like that. But the other girl, she was the exact opposite. She was not very nice. She was very sassy. She kind of said things that hurt people's feelings sometimes. She liked to show off and brag a lot. She wasn't a lot of fun. And maybe you know someone like that too. Anyways, these two girls were doing the job they did every day. They walked up to the fields, they brought everybody lunch, and they walked back home. But you see, what I didn't mention is on their walk, they passed by a graveyard. And on this day, as they were walking on the road past the graveyard, the sassy girl said, "You know, I heard that they buried an old witch in there today." "Oh, you should not speak ill of the dead," said the nice girl. "I don't care," said the sassy girl. I would go right in there and I would spit on that old witch's grave. I'm not even scared." "No, you would not," said the nice girl. "You would just go in there and said you did, and you wouldn't do it." That's all the sassy girl needed to hear. She said, "Do you dare me?" Well, they decided the way she could prove that she had done it, she would take one of the knives they were carrying home from lunch and she would stick it in the dirt of the grave. So the next day in the broad daylight, her friend could go back and look for the proof to see if she was really brave enough to do this. So now she had to find the braveness within her. She walked up to the graveyard gates, and they were big iron rusty gates. And what kind of sound do you think they made when she pushed them? On the count of three, go ahead and make the sound for yourself. A squeaky gate sound. 1, 2, 3. It was pretty spooky. Oh, it kind of made all the little hairs on her arm stand up straight, just opening the gates. But she wasn't going to show she was scared, so she marched right into that graveyard. Now, it wasn't hard to find the grave of this woman. It was there were fresh dirt there on the grave. And, well, she did exactly what she said. She said, "Take that, you old witch." And she spit right on that woman's grave. Then she remembered she had to have proof. So she took the knife she was carrying and she stuck it down in the dirt. And as she did that, oh no, she felt someone pulling on her skirts, and she looked down in the dark night and she saw a flash of something bright in the dirt, kind of like maybe a bony hand coming up out of the earth and holding on to her. "She's got me!" she screamed. And then everything was silent. Meanwhile, her friend is outside the gate and she hears the screaming and she thinks, "Oh no!" She runs to get some help, and, well, she meets the guys already walking up back home on the road, and they all go back to the big gates of the cemetery, and they're going to go in there and look for the sassy girl. But of course, first, they have to push open those big iron gates. So on the count of three, make your squeaky, spooky sound. 1, 2, 3. Woo! Now, it was a little less scary because they had lanterns, but they went searching for her, looking all around. And finally, they saw her. They saw her body laying there on the ground, poor girl. They tried to scoop her body up, but just like what happened to her, it seemed like someone was holding on to her, pulling her down into the earth. But then they looked a little more closely, and it seems that the knife she had stuck into the dirt, well, she had kind of stuck it right through the bottom of her skirt. So it wasn't actually a bony hand from beyond the dead that was holding on to her. She had done it to herself. Well, when they picked her up, she sort of woke up, and when she saw what was happening, she started laughing. And, well, thankfully, from that point forward, she was a little less mean and sassy. But still, those two girls, they swore they would never walk into that big spooky graveyard again. I mean, would you? I know a whole bunch of you are saying, I would do it. I'm not scared. And that's awesome. But remember, if you're feeling a tiny bit scared, just give a gentle squeeze to somebody who's with you, and I bet you'll feel better. I hope everybody's doing okay. I'm going to take a 2-second break and drink some water. I'm done. Okay. Are we ready for story number 3? You know what? A really awesome listener, instead of giving me a thumbs up, did this last time, and that made me feel good. So give me a this if you love ghost stories and you want another one. Awesome. Now, this story is a Native American ghost story. And the cool thing about their stories is frequently they were made up to explain things in nature. So this story has that sort of ending. And again, if you've heard it before, please don't give it away. But it's called The Bloodsucker. Now, when I say the bloodsucker, you probably get a picture of something in your head. The thing is, nobody who had ever seen the bloodsucker had actually lived to tell about it. So all they had were stories. Some people said it was like a giant slimy bat that would fly through the forest, and when it would find the scent of human blood, it would swoop down, land on your head, and suck all of the blood right out of your nose. Other people said, nope, nope, no, 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 no. It is a snake that slithers through the forest in the dark, waiting to smell human blood. And when it does find you, it sucks all the blood right out of your toes. Like I said, I'm not really sure. People just made up stories. The one thing, though, that everybody agreed on was the bloodsucker could smell human blood, and it came out to haunt when the sun went down. Now, there was a little boy who lived on the edge of the forest where the bloodsucker lived. So he had heard stories told about it his whole life. And as you might imagine, he just completely avoided going into the woods in the dark. But one day his mom really needed him to do a favor. He had to take a horse and deliver it to a man who lived on the other side of the forest where the bloodsucker lived. Okay, you might be thinking, great, just go around the forest where the bloodsucker lives. Avoid that thing. But you see, it was a very, very big forest. It would have taken him days to go around it. He had no choice but to go right through it. Well, he just thought, you know what? If I start out very early in the morning, no problem. I can make the trip before it gets dark, before the bloodsucker comes out. Now, his mom was nervous, but she was brave. She said, you're going to be okay. I'm going to pack you a nice lunch. You have a good time. So the next morning, he woke up at the first light of day and he started to walk this horse through the forest. Now, maybe you already thought of this. It took him a little while, but he realized, wait a minute, if I ride the horse on the way there, I'll get there much faster. So he jumped on the back of that horse and he went riding through the forest. And he was right. It really wasn't such a bad trip. He met the man, he sold the horse, and then he decided to stop and have that nice lunch his mom packed him. And it was a really nice spot he found in the forest. There was like a little creek with some water and some trees to climb. And so he was eating his lunch, and then a squirrel came and took a little piece of his sandwich. So he chased the squirrel, and the squirrel ran up this tree, and it seemed like a really good tree to climb. So then he climbed that tree, and that was really fun. And then he was able to jump from the tree into the creek, and he had a nice swim. And well, you get the picture. He started to kind of play and romp in the forest and have a good time. And he lost track of time. And so soon he started to notice that the shadows were getting a little bit longer and the sun was starting to dip in the sky. And he thought, I'd better be getting home. But he had been playing so long, he kind of forgot which direction home was in. Oh, well, he started to feel kind of nervous, thinking about all those stories he had heard about the bloodsucker. And he just said, okay, brain, just think about something else and start walking. So he started to walk through the forest in the direction where he thought his home was. And then it started to get a little darker, and he noticed all the birds were folding up their wings for the night, and it was getting kind of quieter in the forest. So he started to walk a little bit faster. And in fact, he was growing very nervous. And you see, the more nervous you get, his heart was beating fast. And when your heart is beating fast, sometimes it sends the blood pumping through your body. And his face was starting to feel hot and red. And that's when he realized, oh no, I hope the bloodsucker can't smell my blood. Well, that made him start running towards home. And he was running and running and running, and there were tears springing to his eyes, so he couldn't really see where he was going, and he fell face down on the forest floor. He was too scared to even move at first. And then he heard the most disgusting noise. On the count of 3, try and gross out whoever's closest to you with a disgusting noise. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, that was pretty gross. And then he screamed and screamed, and then the forest was silent. Meanwhile, his mom is waiting for him at home. And she's waiting, and he doesn't come home for dinner time. And she's waiting, and he doesn't come home for bedtime. So now she was worried. And the thing is, she was a super brave, really clever, smart mom. Maybe you know a mom like that. So she had a very good plan. She decided she would go hunt down that bloodsucker the very next day and find out what he had done with her son. So she took all of the knives in the house, and she started to sharpen them one by one. She knocked on some of the neighbors' doors and borrowed some of their knives too. And then she wrapped them all up very carefully and put them in a pack on her back. And as soon as the sun appeared in the sky the next morning, she went searching for the bloodsucker. However, she didn't really know how to find a bloodsucker. So maybe you're thinking of some plans. I think I hear one of you thinking, well, maybe it's like dripping slime and she could follow the slime. Or maybe you're thinking it probably lives in a stinky, gross cave, so she could just look for the cave. Well, as it is, it left a trail of blood on the forest floor, and she was able to follow that trail right up to the mouth of a very spooky cave. She quietly approached and she listened. The bloodsucker was asleep. Perfect. Our brave mom went right to work. She took the pack off her back. She took all of those knives out, unwrapped them, and she stuck them down into the ground, one after the other, right in front of the opening of the cave with the sharp parts sticking up. And her plan was, now she just had to get the bloodsucker to come out of the cave. But she wasn't really sure how she was going to do that. And that kind of made her nervous while she was trying to think of a plan. Her heart was starting to beat kind of fast, and then she felt her face get kind of red and hot. And then, well, she heard a, "Ooh, breakfast in bed," she heard a voice say. And he didn't even look where he was going. That bloodsucker just swooped right out of his cave at the scent of her blood. And, well, those knives, chop, 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 chop that horrible bloodsucker up into a million little pieces. Ooh. And then, guess who came running out of the cave? Yeah, Her son was okay. I mean, he was really slimy and he smelled really bad. But other than that, he was okay. So the two of them started to hug and he was saying, "Oh, Mom, you're so brave. You're so awesome. Thank you so much." And then they started to hear a kind of bzz, bzz, bzz. And they looked, and all those little slimy pieces of bloodsucker that were there on the ground, they were starting to sort of vibrate and rise up into the air. And they still fly through the forest at night, waiting to suck your blood, only now we call them mosquitoes. Yeah, that's where mosquitoes came from. Wait, some of you look like you don't believe me. Okay, well, it's a good story anyways, right? How are you doing? Are you doing okay? Is anybody utterly terrified? Good. Okay. I don't want anyone to be utterly terrified. That would be uncomfortable. All right. One more 2-second break. You can count. Okay. I'm done. All right. Are you ready for our last story? Let's think of a new signal. Can you just make a scary, terrifying face for me if you're ready? Let me see you. Oh, okay. Stop. That's good. Okay. Whew. Now, there's something special about this last story. You see, I mentioned at the beginning how one person tells a story to somebody else, who tells a story to somebody else, right? Well, I'm kind of hoping that happens tonight. I'm kind of hoping that you pick one of my stories that you really like and you tell it to somebody else this Halloween. Us storytellers depend on that sort of thing. We want the stories to last forever. So this last story is really easy to tell. And I'm hoping maybe this one is the perfect story for you beginning storytellers, okay? It's called The Viper. And as long as you can count to 5, you can probably tell this story. Oh, well, there is one other thing. Maybe you notice that I make a lot of weird faces and voices and stuff. Yeah, that's also an important part of being a storyteller. So you'll have to try that out too. But listen especially closely to this one because I am sure you could tell it to a friend. Ready? Okay. As I said, this is called The Viper. And this is a story about a very nice old man who loved his little apartment right down the street from the local library. He loved it because he could always walk down the street and get a new book to read. And that was like his favorite thing. Now, I should mention he lived on the 5th floor of this apartment building. And one day he was sitting in his apartment and he had just started a kind of spooky book for the month of October. And while he was reading his book, the intercom rang. He lived in one of those buildings where you could call the person upstairs when you wanted to visit. Yeah. So he went over and he said, "Yes, hello, who's there?" And the voice said, "It's the Viper, and I'm coming to see you." What? The Viper, he thought. Who's the Viper? What's the Viper? Oh, no. Oh, wait a minute. It's almost Halloween. He thought, I bet that's just somebody playing a little trick. Very funny. And he went right back to reading his book. And he kind of forgot all about that first thing. So when the phone rang, he put down his book and he answered and he said, "Yes, hello." And the voice said, "It's the Viper. I'm on the 2nd floor and I'm coming to see you." What? Okay, he thought, that's kind of taking the joke too far. Let's see here. Oh, he had a good idea. He turned off all the lights in his apartment so he could pretend he wasn't home. He closed his book, he set it in his lap, and he sat there very quietly until the phone rang again. I know you're thinking, don't answer it. But in these stories, they always do. So he said, hello? And the voice said, it's the Viper. I'm on the 3rd floor now, and I'll be up soon. Oh no, he thought, this is terrible. I don't want to see a Viper. What am I going to do? I don't even know what a Viper is. Then he decided he would just call the police. He called the police and he said, hello, police, there's a Viper and the Viper is coming to see me. Please come save me from the Viper. Hung up the phone. He didn't give them his address or anything. It wasn't very helpful at all. Oh, he didn't know what to do. And then the phone rang again. And I don't know what made him answer it, but he did. Hello? It's the Viper. I'm on the 4th floor and I'll be right up. Oh no, he thought, okay, what am I gonna do? Okay, calm down. The police are probably on their way. Everything's gonna be cool. I'm just gonna sit here and try and take deep breaths. And then there was a knock on his door. Okay, he thought, I'm just not going to answer the door. I don't want to see a Viper. But then he thought, oh, what if it's the police and they're here to save me? Oh, he knew he had to answer it and they just kept knocking. So he reached out his bony hand and it was shaking as he grabbed the doorknob. He turned the doorknob, unlocked the lock, threw open the door. And there was a little man with a bucket and a squeegee, and he said, hello, I'm the Viper. I'm here to wipe your windows. Get it? I hope you're laughing. Usually I can hear people laughing at the end of that story. I see some smiles, so that's pretty good. So practice with me. On the count of 3, can you just say in your best Viper voice, I'm the Viper and I'm coming to see you, okay? Let's just try that much. You can turn your mics on for this part if you want, so I can hear your storytelling skills. Okay, ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3.
No, yeah, help us.
Okay, so I just have a little bit more advice for you with the storytelling. Here's a little secret. If you forget part of the story while you're telling it, guess what? Just make something up. Maybe nobody will know. Practice your weird faces, practice your spooky sounds and your weird voices, and I bet you can tell one of these ghost stories to a friend this Halloween, and I would be so grateful if you would do that for me. Now, I promised you at the end here, we were going to do something special. It's a little more fun when it's in person, but again, let's turn on our mics so that we can hear all our weird noises, okay? So I know you're all acting like you're very brave. Nobody was scared. But maybe your mom or your dad is feeling a little scared. So let's do this to help them out. You might want to stand up. And on the count of 3, we're going to wiggle and we're going to shake. We're going to say, it's magic. All of the scary feelings are just going to rain right out of you. You're going to feel awesome. Are you ready?
Why is it?
1, 2, 3.
What?
Are you gonna do a wiggle away?
Scary wiggle.
Oh, that was a good topic. That was so good. Can we turn them off again? Because it gets kind of crazy. And I just want to tell you a few important things before I leave. One, if you have friends who don't go to Ellis and you think they would love to hear ghost stories, I'll be doing this again on my own. It's $10 per family, and you can find out about it on my Instagram. My Instagram handle is Tell Stories and Teach, because I do both those things. So if you look there, I'm doing one Thursday night and one next Saturday at noon, and you can check that out. And Colin wanted me to remind you that I'm also teaching some really cool online classes with a teacher that went to Ellis. How awesome is that? Her name is Julie Albright, and she is a phenomenal writing teacher. And since I'm an art teacher, we kind of smushed those two things together to make some very cool classes. And you can find that on the Writing Studio website. The Writing Studio. You can find out about that. It's all on my Instagram too. But I'd love to see you guys all again sometime. You were fabulous listeners. This was super fun. Colin, if you want to jump in and tell me anything else, I haven't been able to see like any of the comments or anything because I just had to focus on my storytelling.
Alison, thank you so much. It was wonderful. I was so excited to start. I forgot to tell you my name. My name is Colin Evans, and I'm a volunteer for the Parent Association and a parent of a fourth grader, Roxy, who is in the corner celebrating.
And you're a parent of a dog named Buddy.
Yeah, yes.
Hi, Roxy.
So I also wanted to let all of you know that I bet if you went into the Ellis Library on Monday and told Ms. Brooke about some of these stories, that she could pull some of the books for you to read too at home, and you could compare the versions, which would be really fun.
That's a really great idea. Awesome.
Does anybody have any questions? I did see in the chat, we had one 4-month-old little brother who was very scared. And I think that Rachel did an excellent job of comforting him.
Nice. I hope you didn't
I
scare
see
your
it. I
parents,
didn't.
guys. If your parents are scared, be really nice to them for the rest of the night, you know? Treat them with care.
If anybody has the Scare the Viper. If anybody has any questions, if you want to put them in the chat, and I will read them to Alison. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And I wanted to, for the lower school families that are here with us, there will be lower school parties outside of school that are virtual, that are lower school room parents and representatives have helped to plan. And they're all different. They'll all be unique to your class and your grade. And if you want to check on what day and what time, you can go onto my Ellis, onto the EPA resource board, and check for that. And always, please feel free to reach out to the Parent Association at the Ellis School, at EPA at the EllisSchool.org. If you have any questions, or you want to volunteer, or you want to comment, or just tell us how great everything is.
I'll throw out there too, if anybody wants to know, my email is really easy to remember. It's storyteller, at AlisonB.com. But I only have one L in Alison, so it's ALISONB.com. I see a lot of people saying good night, and someone says they heard the Viper before. It's one of my favorite. And believe it or not, I thought it was so kind of silly at the end that after I told it the very first time, I thought, I don't know, maybe that story's kind of stupid. And then it was the most requested story I've ever had. Everybody loves it. So do try and share it with a friend. I think that would be super fun.
Oh, we do have one question. Rory's asking, is it safe to go to Virginia?
Yes, of course.
Just, of course, but just be careful and just, you don't want to stumble into the taily pose region, I would say. Just avoid that region, maybe. Asking for a friend. You guys are funny. All right, we got some comedians. That means you're going to be really great storytellers. It's a win-win. They go together well. Thank you guys for being such awesome listeners. Oh, it's so fun.
We might
Go
have
ahead,
one
Colin.
more question down there. Rachel, you want to unmute yourself, please.
So for any of the stories, can we be like super scary? Because for me, when we were supposed to scare anyone near us, I really scared my brother and he started crying super loud.
That's not so good. Remember, then you've got to give him extra hugs, okay? I mean, if you're going to scare your brother, he deserves some extra hugs in return. I'm just saying. But tell your friends some of those stories and scare them this Halloween. I think that'd be awesome. I'd love to see you girls pick up the tradition and keep it going. Thank you, everybody. This was so awesome, and thanks so much.
But I wouldn't do that. Thank
All
you
right.
so much, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.